We are going to do a webinar today on one of the places that the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy does a lot of focused work, and that is the French Creek Watershed, about an hour north of Pittsburgh. I'm Tom Saunders. I'm President and CEO of the Conservancy, and it's a real honor to be able to introduce this webinar. For those of you who aren't familiar with our organization or are just getting to know it, we do land conservation work. We do work to protect threatened and endangered species and their habitats. We protect and enhance the rivers and streams around Western Pennsylvania. We do gardens and green space and urban forestry work, and we own and share falling water. And so we do a broad range of work that protects and enhances essentially the best resources around Western Pennsylvania. And one of the wonderful things about the Conservancy I have found is that if there is an area that's of particular importance, we can bring all our programs, skills and resources and technical help to that area, that resource. And so examples of that are places like the Laurel Highlands, where so many of our staff do conservation work of different kinds, or places like the Allegheny River or the Clarion River, where for decades we've gone back and done more land conservation work, more watershed work, more threatened and endangered species work. And one of those very special places for us is the French Creek Watershed. It is one of the sub-watersheds that feeds into the Allegheny River. And the French Creek Watershed is a place of just extraordinary biodiversity, a place that's just incredibly important from a conservation perspective. So our work there goes back a lot of years. And in every single year, we add properties that we have protected along the creek and watershed projects that we do along the creek, along the stream system. Today, we have two of our experts who work on the French Creek Watershed presenting for us. And they are our Senior Director of Conservation Science, Charles Beer, and our Watershed Manager, Kylie Malin, both of whom do extensive work in the French Creek Watershed. So rather than go on longer, I'm going to pass it along to those two experts. And Charles, I will turn this over to you. Oh, I should also say, if you all have questions during the presentations, don't hesitate to type them in the questions and answers forum. And then as we have time at the end of the webinar today, we will respond to those questions. And if we don't have time to get to all of them, we'll follow up afterwards to you all individually. So Charles, take it from here.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you everyone for coming and joining us in basically our celebration of French Creek being announced as the Pennsylvania River of the Year. As Tom indicated in his slide about the Conservancy, waters, forests, natural areas, and wildlife, we basically refer to this generally as biodiversity, and it's been part of the Conservancy's mission for a long time. And I would say it has actually been receiving more attention in more recent years. Historically, we depended upon some scientists, largely at Carnegie Museum, to guide us in terms of what important biodiversity was to be considered and protected. The term not being used at that time, but people like biodiversity, that is, that Otto E. Jennings, Graham Netting, and others were guiding us and pointing us to places on the landscapes that were really unique and that held unique biodiversity, endemic biodiversity, and important habitats and populations of species to protect. One of those was back in the 50s and 60s, we were advised about some unique wetlands in northwestern Pennsylvania. These are generally referred to as Calcarius Fens. They have mineral-rich groundwater seepage and peat soils, and they do have species that are often so rare they're considered to be endangered. One of those places is what we call Wattsburg Fen Natural Area, as pictured here, directly on the ground. And then here is an aerial view This land was protected by the Conservancy in 1969. It was the first venture that the Conservancy took into the French Creek watershed to protect something. Since those times, we found that Watershed Fen is even more important than we originally knew. And as the headwaters of a stream known as Hubble Run, one of the highest quality streams in the French Creek watershed, it was home of even species such as the endangered northern red-bellied dace, as shown here. In recent times, actually since the early 1980s, we've relied on the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program to guide us in prioritizing biodiversity and biodiversity protection, finding those locations. The Natural Heritage Program is a partnership, and you can see that on the upper left, the agencies that also join in with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy staff to provide scientists and data managers to collect information about all of the biodiversity in Pennsylvania, and especially highlight those that are imperiled. Each one of the states in the United States, as well as some territories and countries outside of the US in the New World, have heritage programs, and they come together to provide a larger picture about biodiversity. Just to talk about the name of the stream for a moment, sort of to inform people who aren't familiar with it. Of course, these lands were originally the home of indigenous peoples. The Seneca people were the most recent. They had their own names for this stream. You can see the name in quotes there is the one that the Seneca used, and apparently this refers to the mink, which is a mammal that would have been up and down French Creek and pretty common along this waterway. The French then came into this area. Apparently they saw bison standing in the creek, and so they called it Rivière au Boeuf, the river of cattle. But then a young George Washington was sent out of Virginia to go up and ask the French to leave the area. He was just in his early 20s. He kept a notebook. He started referring to this waterway, because the French were present, as French Creek. So why should we work at French Creek? I mean, there are many places to work. Why work in this particular watershed? That really has to do with the beginning of, well, in addition to protecting places like Watershed Fen in the 1960s, in the early 1980s, the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program started collecting data about the rarest species, and there were a number of flags that went up about this watershed, and a lot of data pointed to the watershed as a very rich landscape that was harboring lots of biodiversity and species that were quite rare. In 1998, there was a publication. It was a national publication put out by all the heritage programs coming together with their data and asking the question, where are the rarest habitats? Which ones are in the most trouble, basically, environmentally and biodiversity-wise? And they decided that after looking at all the data, terrestrial, palustrin, aquatic, that it was really the rivers were in trouble. So they put out this publication called Rivers of Life after analyzing all of those data. In this publication, it was announced that there were certain watersheds across the nation that if we protected these particular watersheds, about 15% of them across the nation, we could protect biodiversity. And because of the data at French Creek and also the Middle Allegheny River, these watersheds and subbasins were highlighted and included in this report. So this is actually a map of the Ohio drainage out of that report, and you can see that French Creek is included, again, along with the Middle Allegheny River. So, but still, like, why French Creek? Well, a lot of the other streams in the region, in Western Pennsylvania, other parts of Pennsylvania, and also outside of Pennsylvania, had been historically degraded by a number of human uses. French Creek was an exception. In part, this was because the coal resources at French Creek are basically non-existent, and so that was one type of development that did not occur in this watershed that was occurring in other watersheds. French Creek is also in a glacial landscape, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that provides the character, the ecological character of this watershed and the habitats, and therefore the species that are found. So it's a very rich watershed, and it includes many species of special concern that have declined elsewhere, not just in Pennsylvania, but elsewhere on Earth. Here are some examples of some of the rare species that are found in the creek. In the lower right, you can see North America's largest salamander, the eastern hellbender. In the upper left, the eastern sand darter is a very unique fish and is one that's found in French Creek, one of the very few places in Pennsylvania. The log perch on the upper right sort of represents the overall diversity of French Creek. A very interesting species, not entirely rare, but very interesting. And then in the lower left, the northern riffle shell is one of the endangered species, and this species has declined in its total range on Earth by about 95%. And French Creek still has viable, healthy populations. French Creek is really known for its mussels. If you had to say, well, what's one group of organisms that, you know, French Creek is particularly noted for, it's the freshwater mussels. There are presently 26 species that still occur in the stream. There's only one historically that is missing, but it's also missing from all of Pennsylvania. So all the others are intact. And if you go to other streams and small rivers, you'll find that they are either totally devoid of mussels or they have had their population severely declined. So this animal, and I wish I could just spend the whole time talking about freshwater mussels because they're so fascinating, but I would encourage you to get to know it, get to know this group. They live a rather sedentary life, and you can see lots of mussels in this particular image, but here's one in sand that actually is moving along a little bit. So they do move a little bit at times. Here in this photograph, you can see two mussels, one here and one here, that are in the bottom of the stream as typically they are found, and they are siphoning, they're pulling water in and out of their bodies. This particular mussel right here, it's easy to see the in-current and what we call the ex-current siphon, or where the water is drawn in and then pushed out of the body. And it's said that the whole stream or small river can be totally overturned and passed through the bodies of mussels when you have heavy or healthy populations of freshwater mussels in a particular waterway. So they're constantly pumping the stream in and out of their bodies. This is a very diverse group. There are over 300 species in North America. However, many of them are, not many of them, but some of them have gone extinct. And so in terms of percentage of extinct species in a group of animals, it's very high in this particular group compared to other groups. Something of interest is the biogeography of this group of organisms, and by that I mean where are they found. So in Pennsylvania, we have about 67 different species of freshwater mussels, but they're not equally distributed through the major drainages in the state. You can see that the Delaware and the Susquehanna and the Potomac drainages, and up to the north, the Genesee, part of the St. Lawrence, they have relatively small numbers of species of freshwater mussels compared to the Ohio drainage. So in terms of another reason to work at French Creek, it's that it is diverse. It's part of the Ohio system, and it's a healthy ecosystem within the Ohio basin. And so it has lots of diversity. This diversity is also mirrored by the fish species. And if you look at the other number here, you will see that the fish diversity is also following this pattern of being the most in the Ohio drainage and less so elsewhere. So we really have to work where the diversity is, so we come to French Creek. This watershed begins in New York. About 9% of the watershed is in Chautauqua County, and then it comes down through 4 counties in Pennsylvania, through 72 different municipalities, which really treasure French Creek. A number of the municipalities are towns right on the creek itself. The stream is known for recreation, and there is a designation of a water trail on French Creek, and there are maps that are available through the French Creek Valley Conservancy. You can see their address on the stream there. It's used as an outdoor classroom, and just recently Allegheny College began this Watershed Conservation Research Center they're starting up. And I think a large reason for that is because Allegheny College in Meadville is right on French Creek, and that's again an outdoor laboratory and a resource for education. The stream is about 117 miles long. It's really considered to be a small river, and the watershed is huge, over 800,000 acres. It has 9 main tributaries that in themselves are major waterways: the South Branch, the West Branch, LaBeouf Creek, Conneaut Outlet, and others. And it's in this largely glacial landscape. The water volume constitutes 11% of the Allegheny River. I mentioned the glacial history, the geologic history. This is very important because the continental glaciers have advanced into Pennsylvania. The geologists tell us 4 different times. The last 2, the Illinoisan and the Wisconsin, the last one, the Wisconsin, being the most significant. And these glaciers were massive sheets of ice that came down, pushed the land around, but also brought into northwestern Pennsylvania resources that became part of the ecosystem of the landscape, both on land and within the water. So this massive ice sheet coming out of what is now Canada was carrying all kinds of materials and then dumping them basically as the glacier melted and retreated back to the north. So on the left, you can see boulders that are actually brought in from Canada. They're largely granite. And then on the right, fine gravel that makes up the bed of streams and is great habitat for many organisms. The map in the middle sort of showing the different deposits, the different materials that were deposited in the landscape by the glaciers. So most of the French Creek drainage, except for right down near the mouth of the stream at Franklin, Venango County, most of the watershed was glaciated. And in addition to these granite boulders and so forth, there was quite a bit of limestone that was deposited by the glaciers into northwestern Pennsylvania. This is very significant for ecosystems and for species that live there. There are very few natural lakes in Pennsylvania, and there are only about 8 of them in the western half of the state. The rest are in the Poconos and up in the northeast. And they're of glacial origin. So here at Lake Pleasant, Erie County, is where a huge block of ice was sitting as the glacier retreated and the land was filled up with all this glacial material. These are very unique ecosystems, and this is one of the targets for conservation for the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and it has been so since the early 1990s. So this 64-acre natural lake is a glacial lake, and it's also has a high pH. It's alkaline, calcareous, and that's because of all of the lime material that was deposited in the landscape around it. So there's some unique species living there. One of the plants is actually in the sunflower family. It's called Beck's water marigold. It's seen in the lower left. It's actually an aquatic sunflower family plant that lives down in the water and then puts its flower up above the surface when it's ready to bloom and be pollinated. The reason I bring up Lake Pleasant in particular is to point out that this is kind of a conventional project for conservation and for the Conservancy in the past. In other words, here's a 64-acre glacial lake, very important ecosystem, lots of rare species in it, a good target for protection. So we design a project to over time try to acquire the watershed, which is very small for this lake. And we've ended up since 1994, when we acquired our first parcel, we've protected 14 parcels around this lake, protected quite a bit of the watershed, and have a reserve now of 582 acres. We're not done yet, but we've had a lot of success. And again, this was kind of a standard project. But when it comes to a watershed, where a lot of the biodiversity is in this small river, French Creek, that's 117 miles long and has 1,200 plus square miles of watershed, how do you go about that? Well, we have a plan, and we've been working on this plan for a number of years now. There's something called Active River Area, or ARA, which I'll talk about in just a second. But in terms of our conservation goals, here they are. We're focused on protecting the active river area along French Creek and its major tributaries. We look throughout the rest of the watershed for important wetlands or glacial lakes to work on that have their own unique biodiversity that you don't find elsewhere. We also look for large areas of forest, especially if this forest is sitting on something we can identify as a groundwater recharge zone. And that would also be a way to protect the flow of French Creek, which is fed by groundwater. And then if we can acquire land, we do look to see if that land needs to be restored in some fashion. We have a watershed protection specialist, Ann Sand, who works in this watershed, and she's getting to know more and more every year, more landowners. A number of these landowners are interested in conservation and they want to protect their land, so we try to advance options for them. I mentioned the active river area, and this is the area near the stream that riverine ecologists tell us is the most important area to protect. If you have limited resources, there's only so much you can do, and you have a stream that's the size of this small river, a huge watershed. Where are you going to work? You can't work everywhere in the watershed and have the same impact. So this active river area is very similar to a floodplain, although it's larger than that. And it's not just where the river floods and goes outward, but it's also the area on the landscape that contributes back to the river itself. So adjacent riparian zones, wetlands in those riparian zones, what they call meander belts, and then also the floodplain itself. So we've mapped out these areas. You can see an example of one in the lower left there, a floodplain forest with a lot of ostrich fern, which is a common fern in the floodplain along French Creek. And we've looked for properties where we can protect this active river area along French Creek and along its major tributaries in particular. Here's where we established the Cat's Natural Area along Cusawago Creek in Crawford County, a major tributary to French Creek. And this was just the beginning of this natural area, which now is actually 3 times the size of this 284-acre original preserve. We take the ecologically important areas, and then we overlay the ownership of who owns those. So here are two examples, one on Lower French Creek near Carlton and Utica, and then one at Hubble Run where we're not done working at Wattsburg Fen. You can see the fen properties that we have acquired are there, but Hubble Run is very important, and there are more properties that are ecologically important to Wattsburg Fen itself. So we look at the properties, we go through what we call a tiering exercise, and we identify the ones most important. Those are in blue. The sort of second tier properties that might provide buffer, those are in orange, and then some yellow ones that we have yet to research further to see how we feel about those in terms of the importance for the conservation of these ecosystems. So this is the approach that we've been using to guide us along French Creek and its major tributaries, and the unique additional ecosystems like Lake Pleasant that are important to protect. This work is very important because just historically, French Creek has received less attention than some other watersheds, many other watersheds, just because of the lay of the land, the somewhat fragmented ownership. In other words, there are lots of people there, lots of lands are owned and farmed, and there's forestry going on. So it wasn't an area that was sort of singled out as important as the state government was forming state parks and state forests. So you can see here a comparison of French Creek to other watersheds that are also more or less of similar size. And French Creek actually has a fairly low percentage of protected property. There are no state parks here, essentially no state forests. The Game Commission has been protecting quite a bit of land, but it just goes to show that it's that much more important for nonprofits to step in, work with some state agencies that can help us, but to try to get some protection at French Creek. In order to do this, we have joined with some other groups forming what's known as the French Creek Collaborative. And the collaborative is formed from these 6 nonprofit groups. It's a variety. Some of them, like Pennsylvania Environmental Council, deal more with policy. And then groups like Ducks Unlimited are in particular helpful in terms of acquiring funding to be able to do protection in the creek. So this has allowed us to move ahead with the vision for this huge watershed and to move ahead protection and also outreach through the communities along the creek. Here is a summary of what we've accomplished so far. We're pretty pleased with this, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Since 1969, 5,700 acres protected in 53 different parcels of land. The Western Pennsylvania Conservancy has created 15 nature preserves up and down the creek and out in the landscape at places like Lake Pleasant. Out of those 5,700 acres, we have transferred 1,200 acres to the Game Commission. And we also hold conservation easements on private land where the private landowner still owns the land, but the Conservancy holds conservation interests in the land, 11 of those at 1,400 acres. All of our 15 preserves are open to the public. And we have several years ago opened an office in Franklin, Pennsylvania at the mouth of French Creek to service the northwestern part of Pennsylvania. If you would like to visit one of our properties, we have one in particular called Lowville Fen Natural Area. It's in the West Branch drainage, West Branch of French Creek. And if you go to our website, you can find maps and guides, and you can go and walk the trail up at Lowville Fen Natural Area. One of our close partners is also a nonprofit conservation organization. The French Creek Valley Conservancy's been present since 1982 doing conservation work in the French Creek Watershed with a headquarters in Meadville. They have protected over 3,000 acres. They have 31 different properties that they've worked on, and they also have conservation easements. You can see the numbers there. This group in particular is sort of the face of conservation in a lot of ways in the French Creek Valley. They have a number of activities like a river cleanup, and they have annual float trips on French Creek. And we work very closely with them to sort of mirror our efforts on protection and also on the study of French Creek. And for those water trail maps, you can go to their website. You can see it here. And if you just Google search for French Creek Valley Conservancy, their website comes up very easily. You can find that. So in addition to protection, however, there's also stewardship. And we do have a stewardship staff. They have a lot to do to take care of the properties that we do have across Western Pennsylvania. But one of the things that they're concerned about, and that they work with some of our other staff, like in the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program, is the issue of invasive species. These are plants and animals that are not native to the region, and they can they can often create havoc in ecosystems and compete with native species. And generally, besides habitat conversion and climate change, invasive species are the main reason we're losing biodiversity, not only in Pennsylvania and in the US, but really across the world. So it's kind of a constant attention that's needed to control these species. Besides protection, another responsibility is to continue to monitor the environment, monitor this ecosystem, this range of ecosystems, everything from Lake Pleasant and Wattsburg Fen to French Creek itself, to look to see if the species populations are healthy, if they're having problems, how the water quality is. And also a new issue that we have, of course, is climate change, and what is that going to do to all of these ecosystems. So in particular, both the warming up of French Creek and its tributaries is a concern because of climate, another reason to have forests right on the bank of the creek. And excessive flooding can disrupt this small river and actually create lots of problems for species of mussels and fish that are trying to live in the bottom and nest in the bottom of a stream like French Creek. So monitoring will go on. The Heritage Program does some of that work. By the way, a few of these photographs underwater have been taken through what's called a glass bottom bucket. And you can see on the left side, there are people using glass bottom buckets. And this is a great tool. It's a simple tool to be able to explore and to learn and actually see down in water where you usually are unable to really view the life that's there. So this is, as I said, it's kind of a simple tool that we use. If you would like to make a glass bottom bucket and try this out for yourself, we actually have a little guide on how to make your own bucket. And if you write to the Conservancy, you can use the address on the last slide that we'll show you today. We can send you out this guide for making a glass bottom bucket. You can head out into the streams and have a look at the mussels and crayfish, and if you're lucky, a hellbender. So at this point, I'd like to turn this over to Kylie. Kylie is the watershed manager for much of northwestern Pennsylvania and works with communities, works on restoration, and is presently working on a plan for conservation at French Creek. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kylie to talk to you a little bit about her work. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. That was fascinating. Is my volume okay? Okay, thank you. So it's quite obvious how unique and special French Creek is, and it's no wonder it is renowned as a community treasure, as was evident when the community showed their outpouring of love and support for French Creek during the Pennsylvania River of the Year voting to easily win that contest. Part of the River of the Year award is a grant that was gifted to the French Creek Valley Conservancy as the local nonprofit entity to help celebrate and promote the creek through a series of events to outreach and educate and encourage people to get their hands dirty and wet and explore the river. That helps to encourage respectful recreation and nature exploration, getting them in touch with the creek through immersive experiences and hosting stewardship projects and events that will hopefully help instill a conservation ethic and values in the participants of those programs. So French Creek Valley Conservancy is the local land trust and nonprofit organization whose staff serve as conservation advocates and educators. And they also are the spearheads, coordinators of the French Creek Conservation Consortium. So that is a collaborative group of conservation professionals, nonprofits, including many of the ones that Charles mentioned previously as part of the French Creek Collaborative effort, in addition to some others. Western Pennsylvania Conservancy is one of the partners in the collaborative, as is Trout Unlimited, the Foundation for Sustainable Forests, Pennsylvania and New York state and county agencies, including the county conservation districts, who, if you ever have conservation needs, they should be your first point of contact as your local service providers for conservation assistance. The collaborative or the Conservation Consortium also includes Pennsylvania state agencies, including the Department of Environmental Protection, DCNR, Pennsylvania Fish and Boat, and Pennsylvania Game Commission, as well as the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, federal agencies, including the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and even tribal agencies. And these partnerships are what are the key to success in any collaborative conservation effort of any stream. So whether you're listening today from French Creek or some other watershed, there are partners available to help you. So I encourage you to reach out to them and us if you have any issues or concerns that you'd like to discuss. So one of our uniform goals of this collaborative group is to put people in touch with the nature surrounding them and supporting them, providing them with clean drinking water, stormwater management services, and even social economic benefits, just to name a few. And we teach them ways to take good care of those resources. The Watershed program, conservation program here at Western Pennsylvania Conservancy helps connect landowners and municipalities to take stock of the bounty in their backyards and promote watershed stewardship ethics among the public in their communities. We, to get people to care about the streams and the natural areas, we encourage them to turn around and face and embrace the streams flowing through their backyards, communities, and parks. We help connect them with funding and technical service providers to plan and prioritize a variety of projects like river access points, tree plantings, erosion control, and pollution remediation. And we do this through a variety of ways. And again, as I mentioned, collaboration. When I say we, it usually means a group of partners working together to make, to help plan canoe and fishing accesses, public lands and trails that will make their communities more walkable, bike friendly, and help highlight these beautiful and unique places that they have. We work to provide a host of planning and prioritization tools, from broad scale rivers conservation plans, similar to the one that was completed for French Creek back in 2002. We're working to update that to the digital era and make the maps more easily readable, user-friendly. And what these river conservation plans do is provide a catalog of the available information that is out there that has been compiled from various different agencies and resources for the defined area, which is usually defined by a watershed boundary, and help people learn where to find that information and who to connect to help implement a variety of projects. Rivers conservation plans include information on the project area characteristics, demographics, socioeconomics, including environmental justice areas that are hindered by poverty or minority populations and have limited access to outdoor and conservation resources. We identify the land, water, and biological resources that can be found in that area and their uses, as well as cultural historical features of significance and recreational opportunities in the area. And these plans help incorporate public input as well via stakeholder focus groups and public meetings, surveys, and interviews with individuals to help identify issues and concerns, potential threats affecting the watershed, and recommended action plans to engage landowners in protecting and conserving those natural resources. Several of our partners also have developed various prioritization models and tools to help target outreach to landowners in specific areas, or in an effort to make measurable improvements in water and habitat quality. And we also employ on-the-ground assessments to look more closely at smaller areas of the watershed and really identify specific areas of concern and opportunities for projects to improve that area. And those tools and plans also help justify the need for funding to support groups who are seeking grants and donations to make those projects possible. Similar here, we see the Trout Run Advanced Restoration Plan, which is a look at one of the small tributaries in French Creek that is polluted by sediment, whether it's from eroding stream banks or agricultural uses of the land. And we work with those landowners throughout that area to identify where all those sources of pollution are coming from and sort of create a diet plan for pollution to control and stop those sources of pollution enough to improve the water quality so that it can be delisted from the impairments list. So we work with a variety of groups in the area to provide technical assistance services, whether it's to take a project that was identified in one of those plans from the conceptual idea and actually putting it on the ground, or if it's in response to a call for help from a landowner who has a problem on their property and they're looking for the partners to help them solve and address it. So we work with them to develop plans and designs for the project, as well as permitting and bid support to find competitive contractors and good rates for materials from vendors. We also provide assistance with fundraising through grant writing for proposals, as well as grant management, and construction coordination and oversight to ensure that the projects are implemented well and that they will last for a long time. And we also recruit partners to help with monitoring efforts and also reporting the information from these projects to the community to help drum up additional interest in supporting and replicating this work elsewhere. So we are very well connected to a lot of partners in the environmental restoration field and know and can judge based on a project's complexity, who can assist with developing designs and creating materials that will help get support of local stakeholders, ensure that the project is ready to implement once the funding has been found, and make them fundable and attractive to the grant experts. So we assist with a variety of types of projects, including agricultural assistance to farmers to create stabilized stream crossings for both livestock and farm equipment, as well as providing alternative watering sources for livestock so they don't have free access to the stream, and planting streamside trees along those areas where the livestock are now excluded from access to help restore it and create a variety of habitats for wildlife. We also help landowners stabilize eroding stream banks and provide stable access for fishing or just nature enjoyment along the creek. Sometimes instead of the log and stone type of stabilization that you see here, that's a more hard but short-term version of erosion control. We also work to use vegetation, plants, shrubs and whatnot to stabilize eroding stream banks and provide even more enhanced habitat value. And we are working to employ more natural restoration methods, including adding large woody materials, AKA trees. Just cut down trees into the stream that have a variety of ecological and hydrologic benefits to the watershed. When we do this in headwaters areas, for example, in state game lands where there's not a lot of infrastructure risk, or communities, or bridges, things like that, we can cut trees down and put them in the stream to help raise the stream bed elevation and encourage flooding to go out into the floodplains up in the forest where it won't impact the communities and towns downstream as much. We also work to remove barriers along streams, including dams, and reconnect and restore the stream channel in the former impoundment areas, as well as working with local townships and boroughs to manage their dirt and gravel roads and low volume roads to have better drainage for runoff control, and replace culverts that might be too small and hinder not only aquatic organism passage, but also limit the volume of water that can be conveyed through that culvert. So again, these are projects that not only have environmental benefits, but socioeconomic benefits to the community leaders as well. And we also partner with a variety of groups to do monitoring throughout these watersheds. With Fish and Boat, we are a partner in the Unassessed Waters program to study which streams have wild reproducing trout populations in them and afford them better protection in the future from degradation through the permitting processes. We also study eastern hellbender salamanders and the freshwater mussels that Charles mentioned. And Western Pennsylvania Conservancy is a member organization of the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program, which assists with identifying threatened and endangered species occurrences and their important habitats to protect as well. We are also working on identifying and controlling invasive species, both plants and animals, that occur throughout this and other watersheds. And we do monitoring to assess our project success and learn and adapt to have more efficient projects and more effective projects in the future. And we are always looking to get people involved and in the water, get their hands wet and let them touch and experience all these amazing things that are in French Creek and in their backyards, so that they will have conservation ethic and values to conserve and protect those and be our future conservation professionals and stewards. And so if you would like to join us in some of this work, you may volunteer with us to plant trees and gardens, to restore some of these streams or create habitat, or simply spread the word and tell your neighbors. There's no better advertisement than word of mouth from a trusted friend. So we would appreciate anything you can do to help spread the word about this good work. And there is my email if you would like to contact me directly regarding these opportunities in this watershed. And in addition to volunteering with us, your membership is so important and can help us expand the reach of our work and our footprint in this watershed and in other areas of Pennsylvania. And we love getting to meet and spend time with you too. So we would like to see you at one of our members' days in the future. Thank you all for watching today. And if you have any questions, please include them in the chat and we will get to those now.
Kylie and Charles, thank you both for great presentations. And I see that we do have a few questions. So Jen, maybe you can take a look and organize us through those.
Sure thing, Tom. Thank you. Thanks, Kylie. Thanks, Charles. That was fantastic. So much information, and it's really exciting to see how much work we're doing up in the watershed, French Creek watershed. We do have a few questions, so I'll get right to them. And I just want to encourage everyone that if you do have any questions, to put them in the Q&A. If we can't get to everything, please send us an email at info@paconserve.org, and we'll get your question to the right person and make sure it gets answered. And just a reminder to everybody that this webinar has been recorded, and we'll be sending you a link within the next couple of days so that you can either watch it again or share it out with people, or check out the Q&A at the end if you need to hop off early. So without further ado, we'll get to some of the first questions and comments. First is, someone suggested that we provide a reference guide that would be useful for the identification of freshwater mussels for a landowner. I don't know if we have something like that available already. Charles, are you aware of any reference guides on freshwater mussels that we can direct people to?
We did not prepare something ahead of time, but if the person or other people would care to contact us through the info PA Conserve with your email, we'll get back to you. We can put together a list of references, both digital and a couple hard copy.
Okay. Philip asks, freshwater mussels are purifying the streams, but does that impact other species negatively? For example, in the Great Lakes, the invasive zebra mussel has purified the lakes, but I believe that harms the ecology.
Right, and the zebra mussel is called a mussel, but it's actually not related to our freshwater mussels in any way. It's a very different organism, and it's not native, and that's the big point. All of our freshwater mussels that we've talked about are native species. They have evolved here over millions of years and fit in with the ecosystem, whereas the zebra mussel has come in and went kind of gangbusters on our ecosystems and has really changed things. So the answer is no. Our native freshwater mussels do not create problems for other wildlife. In fact, they are food sources, they are habitat for other wildlife, and they fit into the ecosystems very well, unlike an invasive species like the zebra mussel.
Great, thank you. Can you show trends in water quality since efforts to protect French Creek began? Is water quality improving or stabilized or degrading?
Kylie might want to answer that in part. We depend largely on the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection for information about water quality. And of course, when you're trying to protect active river area and wetlands nearby and those sorts of things, it takes a long time to actually make a difference. But You know, there are other differences that are important also beyond water quality. We talked about stream temperature and so forth. So we don't have those data that I know of. I think French Creek is still holding its own, and protection is happening. There's some development happening also. I don't have any indication that there's large degradation at this point, but we're concerned about it.
And just to add to that, Charles, that yes, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection monitors streams through macroinvertebrate studies, as well as water quality testing to identify and designate which streams are listed as impaired and which ones are attaining their designated use.
Thanks, Kylie. Thanks, Charles. How do you define impaired streams? Do you use nitrogen and phosphorus levels?
That's one of the indicators of pollution. Again, the term impaired, which streams are designated as impaired or not, is dependent on a variety of factors and sources of pollution, which may or may not be nutrient related. It could be sediment or abandoned mine drainage and other sources of impairments. And those are all available through the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. It's called the Integrated Water Quality Assessment Report.
So the use of that word impaired, it is in one way kind of an official term. In other words, as Kylie said, the Pennsylvania DEP actually designates streams as being impaired.
Great, thank you. Someone asked what the contact is for the glass bottom buckets, and I believe we're asking people to send an email to info@paconserve.org, and then we'll send that along to you,
Yes.
Charles. Is that correct?
Right.
How significant are any changes to the landscapes of French Creek? Is the land use largely stable, or are there fast-growing threats that affect the Conservancy's time to achieve its protection goals? So how significant are key changes to the landscapes at French Creek?
French Creek continues to develop. The landscape does, the watershed does. The counties in particular, like Crawford County, are not fast growing, but there are changes that are taking place. Some of the parts of the watershed closer to Erie are receiving a little more pressure. It's not, in my experience, an area as you would find closer to some urban centers where, you know, there are housing developments and bedroom communities, suburbia being created.
Kylie, any comment there? Charles covered it. Kylie's slides included one showing two maps of impaired streams, 2002 to 2022, the viewer believes. Can you explain the difference? It looks like a lot more degradation. Is that right? And do you know the causes?
Again, those maps are based on the DEP data. And to the next question, is it just better measurement? I believe that may be part of the case there, that some of the streams just weren't monitored or surveyed to determine whether or not they were degraded back in 2002 compared to now.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. And that person added in another question, or is it just better measurement? I apologize, I missed that. In what ways does climate change affect watersheds, streams, and creeks?
Well, climate change, of course, is changing our environment in a number of ways. But in particular, the global hydro system is being charged with a lot of water. In other words, the ice is melting. We know that the world is becoming warmer. And that allows much more water vapor to be evaporated and to be circulating across the globe. This is resulting in the potential for excessive downpours and rain events. We've experienced some of those. We continue, they sort of vary in the country depending on where you are. You might experience something one year and then not the next. Of course, in Eastern Kentucky, we're hearing about the devastation right now by that event, which climate scientists would say that the climate change is part of that. So that's one of the things we're concerned about. We're starting to see some changes in streams due to excessive flooding. These very energetic flash flooding events with a lot of water very quickly, and that has the potential to upturn the substrate on the bottom of the creek. This is where fish are nesting. This is where the hellbender is trying to nest under rocks that can be swept away and disrupted. So those kinds of events. We're also concerned about the temperature. Some of these species have their limits as to the warmth of the water and just what they can live in. And warmer water tends to hold less oxygen. So that's a problem also, just in terms of them breathing.
Great. Thanks for that, Charles. This person says, I'm a birder. I believe we'll make this the last question. And then after this, we're going to direct people, ask people please to send their questions to info@paconserve.org, the address that's listed on the screen there, as we need to wrap up pretty soon. But these are all great questions and we really appreciate these are fantastic questions that everyone's asking. We really appreciate your attention. Last question. I'm a birder. Would you list the 9 bird species of special concern in the French Creek watershed? Charles, do you know those off the top of your head?
Well, again, I could get those to you if you want to send us an email, but quite a few of them are wetland species. So both of the bitterns that we have in Pennsylvania, the least bittern and the American bittern, are species of concern. The black tern is another wetlands, open marsh, and lake breeding species of bird that is also of concern. The sedge wren has been recorded from the drainage. The marsh wren is also another species that does occur in the drainage. How many is that? I think I'm probably missing a few, and I could put the list together if you want to get in touch.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your time. Don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Send us emails at info@paconserve.org, and I'll turn it over to Tom for a final thank you.
Eileen, Charles, thank you so much for the great presentations. And as Jen said, thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate you taking time in the middle of your week to join our webinar, and we'll see you all soon.